So today I have Becky Fowler at Creative Coven Arts. First off, I want to ask you what that is. What is Creative Coven Arts and what do you do?
What do I do? So I'm an intuitive painting facilitator, and I'm bringing my business in a new direction come the new year, more in terms of spiritual mentoring on a one-to-one basis. So supporting women who are change makers and leaders and creatives and artists wanting to do their work in the world, and I want to support them to get their work out there and to live their most magnificent selves out in the world.
That's so
That's what I
magical.
do.
I love it. It's so awesome. Um, and then the reason why we have you here is because you used to live tiny. Is that correct?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And what did that look like for you?
So, yeah, so we lived in lots of different tiny homes over a 10-year period from 1998 to about 2008. And we lived in Australia as well as in Ireland, and we did a bit of traveling around in the UK as well. So it looked like lots of different things for us. So when I talk about us, I'm talking about myself and my husband, and then eventually our children as well, lived with us tiny. So my husband had lived in vans and traveled around the world, backpacking and living kind of tiny in all sorts of places before we met. And then when we met in the desert in Australia when I was teaching sheep mustering. And we decided to travel. I hadn't left Australia since we emigrated there when I was a child. So I was desperate to travel.
Yeah.
So we went to the UK where he was from and where I'm actually from as well originally. And we bought a van, a Luton. I've written them down. My husband reminded me of what all of the vehicles were.
Yeah.
It was a VW LT35 Luton van. So it had like a little bit above the cab where we slept, and the rest of the van was like a removal van, like a furniture van.
Okay.
And very roughly converted it into like a makeshift camper. We just had threw a mattress above the cab, and we used lots of scrap to deck it out, blankets and bubble wrap and all sorts of things for insulation on the walls, and an old door kind of became like a seating area. We had caravan cushions that we got from somewhere. Like we went to all these scrap places and just kind of got bits and pieces to kind of put it together.
Yeah.
And it was very rough and ready. It's, we carted water with us, and, sort of had very rustic toilet facilities, bucket and chuck it system, and
Yeah.
that kind of thing, gas cooker, and off we went. So it was very much about just being able to take off and travel and have somewhere to live at the same time. Our idea was to go to Ireland, which is where he'd spent a long time before we met, and just cruise around there, kind of traveling about, which is what we did for a full year until I became pregnant with our first child. And we went back to Australia and lived tiny again there. We moved into a caravan with an annex on it in a caravan park right next to the ocean.
Okay.
It's just like a little path between the caravan park and the ocean. We lived there for about 18 months. Then went over to Korea, where I taught English for a little while, and then back over to the UK and Ireland. And again, we went tiny living there. We bought a caravan for £70. It was tiny little caravan. I was looking now to see the size. It was 12 foot by 6 foot. It was tiny.
Wow, that's really small.
Yeah, it was really small. We towed it on the back of our car on the ferry over to Ireland, and just basically we lived in it. It was for the purpose of just having something to be in, to tide us over until we got somewhere else. But I think we were in it for about 2 months. But it was going from October into the winter.
Yeah.
Pretty tough going. We had a little pot-belly stove in that one to keep us warm. And then we moved into an old cottage, which turned out to just be like walls dripping with water and just really not nice. And
Oh,
our son developed asthma. So again, my husband said, like, we need to do something. We can't afford to be moving into any flash houses with central heating and all the rest of it. So he bought us a Bedford TK horse box, a big, one of those big horse transporter.
yeah. I saw a picture and I'm gonna put it in a post. Yes. I love
Yeah,
it. It's so cool.
yeah. So yeah, so the idea there was to create a home that was as natural as possible. Because Eli had asthma, we wanted it to be, dust free, or as dust free as possible, that without allergens in it, that kind of thing. So uh, yeah, so he set to, when we bought the horse box, some sheep had been living in it up
Uh-huh.
until the point that we had to wait for the sheep to lamb and have their babies in the truck,
Yeah.
and until the babies were grown up enough that we could have the truck. So once they'd finished with it, we took it over
Yeah.
and drove it back to where we were living, and we lived in that for about 4 years. Um, and that was parked on the property where the cottage was. So we had access to the cottage still for our hot water, bathroom facilities. And we lived then in the truck, sleeping, cooking, everything else really. Um, so yeah, and then we had, so in between that, we went down to Spain and Portugal for a couple of months and lived in a tent. We drove down there with the kids when I was on maternity leave. Amy was 4 months old. And we lived in a tent for two
And
months.
that was the second child, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
So instead of staying in Ireland for 6 months on maternity leave, I thought, well, why don't we go to Spain and Portugal where it's warm? And
Yeah.
so we just drove down there in this old car that we had and took a tent and sort of spent time in different places all around Spain and Portugal for a couple of months, which was, it was fun.
Yeah. What
Yeah, so I think that kind of sums up the different places that we lived in over the 10 years.
what
Mm.
did you do for I heard you say you taught English for a little while, and was there other jobs that you had too, or
Yeah, so I qualified as a teacher after school. I went to uni, became a teacher, and that's what I was doing when I met my husband out in the desert.
okay.
So I taught English in Korea, and in Ireland I worked as a teacher with children with disabilities in an early intervention service there for a few years, and then I worked as a manager running their service for adults with intellectual disability and autism.
Okay.
Different jobs. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love it. Um, did you see benefits of living smaller versus living in a house? Like what kind of benefits did you see there?
So I suppose in the different places that we lived in, we moved into those places for different reasons. Mostly for us, it was financially related.
Mhm,
We lived in those places because it was cheaper
mhm.
to live tiny, and also to be able to buy something to live in, you know. So financial reasons were mostly the motivation for us to live tiny. Also, freedom, being able to travel, like when we
Yeah.
lived in the van and traveled around the UK and Ireland. I mean, that was just perfect to just, you'd go to the pub and you could park in the car park, and, within a couple of minutes of leaving the pub, you were in bed. It was
Yeah.
great that way. Um, yeah, so freedom, being able to travel around and go to beautiful places, wake up in beautiful places, that was definitely a benefit. And just the simplicity, living very simply and very pared back, not having a lot of possessions.
Mhm.
I think there's something very freeing about that as well. When we left
Yeah.
Australia, we sold everything, and even in the caravan and annex that we lived in, we had accumulated stuff. I mean, you just fill the space wherever you live, you fill it with stuff, don't you?
Yeah, isn't that funny?
Stuff. But we left Australia with 2 backpacks,
Oh,
and
wow, okay.
we just sold everything and left. So when we went to Korea to teach English, but we left there because of 9/11.
Hmm.
When that happened, it was very uncertain times, I suppose, all over the world. We weren't sure what was happening. So we left Korea and we went to the UK. We hadn't intended to leave. We didn't, it was very like up in the air.
Oh,
So we landed in the UK with a couple of backpacks and not knowing what we were going to do. So we stayed with my husband's family for a little while and then bought a caravan because we knew we wanted to go back to Ireland. So it was like a little stopgap. It was the way of getting from A to B and having somewhere to be. We knew we could live tiny, so that just
yeah.
seemed to make sense for us.
That's so great because I think that I'm hearing that it fit really well with all of the things you wanted to do. It wasn't just a financial thing, it was because you wanted to do other things.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the truck that we created was very eco-conscious as well. It was we were being very mindful about wanting to use natural materials and have things to be for our environment to be as healthy as possible for us and for the kids. So
Yeah.
buying something that we could afford, which was the truck, that gave us the freedom then, I suppose, to create the sort of healthy space that we wanted to live in. So
Yeah. I love it. Um so yeah, okay, so you just talked into that too. Was there some other ways that you saw living tiny was good for the environment?
So I think when you're living tiny, you're using less of everything.
Yeah.
I mean, you're using less electric because you don't have to either heat or, light a very big area. So you're using less electric and less water. Like we were carting water. Everywhere we lived was very rustic. Like I see the lovely tiny homes that people have now, and they have like all this whiz bang kind of gadgets and things that really make it so easy and convenient to live in. But we roughed it. Like at one point I was washing cloth nappies in the stream next to the caravan, on the side of the road, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like yeah. Even in the truck, we carted water from the house into the truck to use for washing up and kind of boil the kettle on the gas to heat up the water. Or we used the wood fire range in the house to heat water to bring out to the truck. So there was, different ways that we used the resources that we had as efficiently as we could because for cost and for environment.
Yeah, yeah. I see it so intertwined and together, and it's not just because of saving money, and it's not just because of environment. They're very connected together.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Um so yeah, those were the big questions I had. I don't um I think that sounds really awesome. And where do you live now?
So we've just moved to the UK. Well, I suppose about a year and a bit ago, we moved from Ireland to the UK. So we're living in a semi-detached house now
Okay.
in a city which is so different from what we've been used to in living in Ireland. So yeah, we're not living tiny at the moment. Maybe we will in the future. My husband really would love to go back to doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has that running through his veins, and just that wanting to travel and have the freedom to go where he wants and to live how he wants. It's a bit of
Yeah.
an anarchist.
I feel like that's in your future again.
Yeah, it could well be. I mean, one thing I do love though is to have space for myself, to just be able to be in my own space. So I think, living tiny, that is one of the challenges, I suppose, of living tiny is sharing a space with other people and being able to feel like you can get away if you need to kind of
Yeah.
sort of gather yourself and then come back because it's quite intense living with people in a small space. So I think when we lived in Australia, when we lived small in Australia, you can be in the outdoors so much more easily. Like we had sort of places that you can go and sit outside, and you could go off for a walk off the beach or whatever to be on your own. So I
Right.
think that's an important part of living tiny, is that you can look after your own needs by getting out and about and having space for yourself. Yeah.
Right. So if you could imagine going back to living tiny, do you imagine like building something or somehow creating something that you could figure out how to create that space in the place, and then like wherever you go, you also create that space, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so. If we were to live tiny again, I think it would be something that is mobile. Like,
Mhm.
I really love the combination of being able to travel and have your home with you.
Mhm.
Um, that's amazing. So yeah, I think in future, if we were to live tiny, that would be it, to be able to use it in combination with traveling. And then once your places, then you can kind of, if you lived in a community as well, like if you sort of turned up somewhere where there was a communal space and communal buildings, I think that's also something that intrigues me and kind of interests me as well, that you'd have maybe a shared um, facilities with other people who are
Yeah.
also tiny, maybe in the same sort of area. There's
And you
something similar
have,
you're talking about, isn't it?
yeah, I was just gonna say,
Yeah.
you haven't lived that though yet. That's correct, right?
Not really. I mean, the caravan park was something along those lines
Mhm.
when we lived in the caravan park in Australia. It was like a retirement village. Like Eli, our baby, had so many surrogate grandparents in that caravan park. It was amazing. And
Right.
everyone would pop by, and we had the little stair gate sort of thing above across the door, so he couldn't get out and go down to the beach by himself. And all these neighbors would just pop by and go, "Hi Eli, how are you doing?" And
Yeah.
chat to him through the door and whatever, which was really lovely.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, my dream is to one day create a tiny house community, and I picture it so much in my head, and I would like to buy a campground and keep part of it as a campground, and then turn part of it into residential tiny homes or vans or schoolies, and then another section of it I'd like to have that same kind of thing as vacation rentals. And
Awesome.
so then I would like to have a community center, where everybody comes together, and maybe there's dance night and, game nights, and then like a little miniature store. And oh,
Yeah,
and I really would like to have landscaping, permaculture landscaping, where all the landscaping is feeding everybody. And um,
amazing.
I just like,
Sounds lovely. Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, I someday that's gonna happen. I don't know when yet, but that's the dream.
Yeah, and it sounds so clear, Katie. I can just visualize it. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Thank
amazing.
you. Thank you. Oh, that's so great talking to you.
And you.
I don't know like if I have more questions, but I really enjoyed this so much and I appreciate it a lot.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed it too. Thanks for asking me. It was really fun to kind of look at the photos. Like I sent you the photos this morning. It was really fun to kind of look at those and to remember, how things work. So it's a very different way of life. It's really
Yeah.
quite a unique way to live. Yeah,
Yeah, it's just like living in a big house, there's some benefits to it and then there's some struggles to it, but it's the
absolutely.
same thing as anywhere that you live.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you just have to be adaptable and flexible when you're living tiny. Like we really relied on having systems in place. You got really good at having, like, okay, this is the system, this is the routine, this is the way that we do things, this is where we store that particular item, and I need that one after this other thing, so that therefore has to go in that place, because then it's accessible at that time. So it was very, like, we became quite good at having to work out the routines and how best to use the space that we had.
Yeah.
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 And once you work that out, and it's unique for everybody, and unique to the space as well. But I think once you have that down pat, then it's just super easy, and it's you know way less cleaning. So it's
Yeah,
way more time for everything else that you want to be doing.
right.
Yeah, so
Adventuring.
adventuring, exactly, being out. So I suppose, yeah, when you live tiny, you can live in a beautiful place and spend way more time out in nature, actually enjoying the world. So
Right. Oh, it's so good. I love it. I love it. Thank you.
you're so welcome.